Welcome to The Factor, a podcast series for the life sciences industry powered by Kymanox. Today's episode is with Nick Schill, Senior Director of Product Development at Kymanox, and Duane Mancini, CEO of Project MedTech, which helps medtech startups through its podcasts, events, webinars, and consulting services. Duane started his career as a chemist, and while he enjoyed his work in the industry, he started to get the entrepreneurial bug. So he shifted his career to being a technical advisor, and then he took a business development role at NAMSA to learn more about sales. NAMSA was helping startup companies expand their breadth of services, and that's where Duane started to see an opportunity.
Through all those business development questions, you really get a good feel for what's actually burning on the plate of these startup companies. What are they actually struggling with? Where can they go for certain things? And that wasn't necessarily clear for them. And so there were things that they were struggling with that NAMSA couldn't solve for. And so that would have been 2020. I decided that I was going to leave NAMSA maybe around February. And as everyone who's listening to this podcast knows, that's probably poor timing to start a startup company. So my last day would have been like the end of April. By that time, the world had shut down. The 3-year-old that you're probably going to hear routinely during the recording of this podcast in the background, my wife had just told me she was pregnant with our first child, and that would have been April 4th, and I'm quitting my job. And so I ended up launching the company on April 27th as just a podcast series. That was kind of my background in the start of Project MedTech, and I went into Project MedTech full-time in 2022, and so I'll just kind of breeze through that and take you up to what we do now. We're a team of about 17. We have a consulting arm, we have a media arm, and we have an events arm of our company. Again, the whole goal is to accelerate medical technology to improve patient lives, but it's also to create an ecosystem where medtech companies can thrive. We do a startup symposium as well that we host every year. It's currently in Houston, Texas, and that takes startup companies from ideation through exit. And everything in between. There's a pitch competition, and there's also investors there as well. So it's a nice little startup environment. More information on the website on both of those. But the consulting services are our bread and butter. So there we focus on finance, operations, and commercial strategies. The idea that I saw was finding experienced finance, ops, and commercial leaders was difficult for a startup company. You would go and find a CPA firm, you'd find an ex Johnson & Johnson or Strategic, Medtronic, whatever, person who was retiring, and you might bring them in, and then same thing with commercial. And so if we could bring that all under one roof, do we accelerate, and do we also have the ability now to turn off and turn on services as you need them, because you probably don't need a full-time person. And so within the consulting group, the finance side, we build pro formas, we do cap table dilution scenarios, we help with investment strategy, we do all the bookkeeping for our clients. We're their CFO, right? And their accounting team. On the ops side, we build quality management systems, help with regulatory strategy. We do the talent acquisition, so the recruiting. We actually hire our replacements frequently as they scale and grow. We do a lot with the general ops of the company, so milestone mapping, building out your internal management system, all of these things. And on the commercial side, healthcare or health economics and reimbursement, commercial strategy, economic value, marketing, sales. And our sweet spot is probably pre-seed through Series B, right? So at pre-seed level, as you can imagine, it's a lower engagement. As they hit seed and Series A, they're engaging us a lot. And then as Series B happens, they're probably starting to hire full-time people because there's a need for it.
Great. I appreciate that overview. And, obviously it helps folks who are not overly familiar kind of understand Project MedTech and where you are and where you're going. So appreciate that. So I know we have a limited amount of time today, but obviously this is a larger topic as far as strategic planning and startups for life science, right? So let's just hit on kind of maybe some of the high points, have a discussion, and we'll see where that goes. So I guess, kind of first thing for me is I work with quite a few startup companies as well, and I see them do good things, and I see them do things that maybe aren't so wise. And I mean, sometimes they will listen and sometimes they don't listen, right? And that's part of the job, is to help convince them to do the right thing and at the right time, at the right scale. But a lot of times, I would say that they're a little less agile than they should be, because they have this big company mentality, even though maybe it's one or two people. So part of this, I would say, relates back to fundraising, right? And perhaps they are trying to act like a big company to help with the fundraise, but I think as well that that's not really necessary, right? So I guess, do you have some tips for some of the smaller life science startups in how they can go about fundraising, kind of maintain their agility as a small company, and how they can address some of these fundraising challenges, especially today where we know the climate's not great?
Yeah. So I think, to your point, agility is one of the biggest things in these early rounds. Being able to, I can't, we've taught, boy, I wish we had a good stat for this, but there have been a lot of conversations that we've had where we've talked to a company that's going out and raising a seed round or a pre-seed round. And they're like, well, we're going to raise $3 million, or, we're going to raise $2 million. And I go, great. And what are you going to do with that $2 million? What are the things you're going to achieve with that? And we make that list, and that's a great exercise. And then I tell them, great, before we even go out, if you had to cut this round up into threes, four, into two separate rounds, how would you do it? And which one of these priorities would be the first thing you would check off so that you can get to that next value inflection point? That, I think, is crucial, and this is why we go through that pro forma milestone mapping type of exercise, where we look across the various swim lanes across your company and figure out, okay, well, where do the value inflection points lie, and then how do they overlap, and which ones drive more value, which ones are more easily obtainable, because fundraising will never go as planned. It'll never happen. It's always, well, I'll come in if you can get this person in, or I'll commit 5 if you can raise $1 million. And there's always these stipulations, and so it's a constant negotiation. So whatever you think is going to happen, you just need to think through some of the scenarios ahead of time, based on experience. That and you're going to have even if you're not experienced with it, you always have a team around you that has some level of experience. But you got to think through some of those scenarios and what that might look like. And then the other thing too is also just be prepared. There are a lot of things that are outside of your control during this race you're going to be on, right? Like, I was just talking to someone before this call about, I not much of a runner. I wasn't. Now I've gotten into running, and I ran my first half marathon early in the year. And what my wife told me, who's an experienced runner, she said, whatever you think your goal is, just throw it out. It could rain. It could be 20 degrees hotter than it normally is. And so no matter how much you prepare for this fundraise, the point here is that no matter how much you prepare for this fundraise, there will be things that you're just gonna have to deal with on the fly.
Sure.
And that's
sure.
uncomfortable. That's uncomfortable for people, I think.
No, it makes perfect sense, right? And I've seen the same occur with some of our smaller clients going through this exact same effort, right? We try to help them pivot, and if they get some feedback from some potential investors, we help try to make the best of that and maybe present the data in a different way, or adjust, right? And I think that adjustment is definitely key. So I guess that kind of leads me to, I would say, you mentioned before about value inflection points and trying to break that up. One thing I see is when folks are kind of going down the fundraising road is that they don't know what investors want to see, right? So what actually will provide the value proposition they're looking for a potential investor? Do you have any tips there about kind of what the most kind of key topics is that a investor would want to see?
Yeah, I have ideas of key topics that I think are big value drivers. But I do want to. I think it's important because this is another flaw of a lot of startup companies when they go out and start talking to investors about areas that they think are important that they should be solving for. You need to make sure you're talking to the right investor for the stage that you are at. If you're a pre-seed company and you're trying to figure out what are your value inflection points, and you're talking to a venture group that only does Series B and beyond investments, you should talk to them for sure, of course. But what they view as value inflection points probably aren't what you're concerned with right now. And so that happens frequently. What I think value inflection points are, especially in the life science industry, obviously regulatory, approval, clearance, whatever it is important. I'm not sure it's as big of a value inflection point as it used to be. I think that's definitely kind of tapering off. I think for the most part, the big value inflection points here are going to be clinical data at an early stage, and commercial traction if you can achieve that. And that means getting in to if you're selling to the hospital system, getting into a few early adopters and achieving as much clinical data as you can with those early partners. So think about, you have in commercial, you're going to have early adopters, and then you're going to have the laggers, the people who don't adopt technology as early. So when you get those early adopters, you have to achieve as much of that as possible. That is going to build towards your commercial and market strategy later on.
No, that totally makes sense. And I agree with you, right? It's kind of knowing what message you need to be sending at a given time, given where you're at. And obviously everyone wants to see phase 2 clinical data, but you have to get there somehow. And that means someone has to kind of take that leap of faith so that you have the funds to get to a phase 2, right? So it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah. And I think, when you think about life sciences as a whole, I think pharma, and this is where pharma and medtech are totally different, in my opinion, right? Because pharma forces you to, the way their clinical trials are based when you have a new drug application, it forces you to have I think, a double blind, placebo trial in most cases, or you're comparing it to whatever the current standard of care is. And I could have butchered that because while my degree is in pharma side of things, we don't do anything in pharma.
No, you got it pretty close.
Okay. But on device, there's the 510K pathway, which means you're substantial equivalent to something else on the market. And so no matter what, you can't be that different. Like, I know you could be better, I'm sure, right? But it's not like you just can't be that different than whatever else is out there. And so there's a lot of products on the market. So if I show you, 2 different catheters, you're going to be like, well, I don't know which one's better. Show me the clinical data. So it's critical. And a lot of those 510Ks, it's not required by the FDA to have clinical data. So there's just going to be a lot of products on the market that don't have clinical data. And I don't know how you sell without it.
No. Yeah, I agree. That makes a lot of sense. And it's just getting to that point where you have something that you can solicit to your potential investors, right? And I agree, pharma is a bit different, right? And I would say, I don't want to call it more challenging, but it has its own unique challenges, right? And definitely the capital investments there are, I would say, at a much higher level, especially if you're talking about new molecular entities, right? For something that's more like a generic or something you're repurposing, that's a different story, right? There's investments there, but it's not like a new molecular entity. But in any case, so let's talk product development strategy for a bit, because I actually think this is a place where a lot of the smaller companies are having trouble, right? Staying focused, having those defined milestones that should be linked to funding, but aren't necessarily linked to funding, and be able to communicate that outward. But really, how do we, everything that I run into in this space is how can we do this faster, right? So I guess what would be some tips for folks that they have a strategy, but we need to accelerate that strategy while still maintaining regulatory compliance, and hopefully you're not taking risks that jeopardize your technical success of the program?
This is a interesting one because what I've been seeing frequently now is almost like with, I guess, staying focused on the product, right? And the product at hand. I see this happen frequently with startups where they start to add more features to their product in this early phase to make it better. And where my frustration lies with that sometimes is just focus on whatever the core thing is.
Right.
Stop
What is this
adding
supposed to
all
do?
right. Like stop
Right.
adding all the bells and whistles right now, especially at the stage we're seeing companies, right? Seed, Series A, early stage companies. It's like, guys, is that really a necessary feature like right now? Isn't the point this? Like make the industry and your early adopters want this ugly thing and then make it beautiful. And so I feel like sometimes we rush through that a little bit as an early stage startup company. From a product development side, that's where I've been seeing a lot of companies fail. Like it's almost like this it's every time I talk to them, it's like, well, we could do this, well, we could do this, and we could do this. It's like, well, no, I know that, but wasn't the intention this? Let's do that first, and then let's add these things on, right? Because early adopters are going to adopt this no matter what. Like if they truly believe in what you're at the core you're doing, they're going to use your product. How you add features as you try to get into the laggers, right? And you want the other people to start using it now. So yeah, I think that's heading back to commercial again. If you always keep that commercial goal in mind, which is pretty much what you need to be thinking about at all times, then it kind of eliminates this product development issue at the beginning. But just don't do too much, I guess, is the more succinct advice here.
No, that makes perfect sense, and I definitely agree with that because I've seen startups struggle spinning their wheels for years trying to make this product perfect for basically that first commercial product, right? And I would say, you probably could save that for lifecycle management, right? And then you can do your new and improved product down the road, and great, right? But trying to talk them into that, on the other hand, is another matter. Doesn't always work.
Yeah, it does not always work. Yeah, that's right.
So let's talk a bit about quality management systems, because I've also seen where some startups struggle to be well grounded in what they really need right now from a quality management system perspective versus what they can wait 6 months, a year, 2 years for, pre-commercialization, post-commercialization, et cetera. So I guess kind of what would be your mentality on how startups should approach building out their quality compliance system?
Yeah, we have a full quality team in house here, and Brittany Ritchie leads that effort for us. She's been on the Project MedTech podcast and talked about it, and plenty of information on it. But we use a phased approach towards it, and so we've kind of taken the implementation of a quality management system and really tried to make sure it fits with all the other swim lanes within the business and kind of matches up with the phase in which the company is from a product side. And this is kind of like quality is it might be the one where I contradict myself the most. Like we have a ton of clients where I'm like, this is overkill. And then we have other clients where I'm like, tell me you have something, right? Like there's a very wide variety here. And so I think the phased approach really kind of keeps you in that. It gives you, based on where you're at and your product development life cycle, it kind of keeps you in those bumpers, if you will. But the importance of this though, and this is why we kind of push, to have this phased approach so it's kind of right sized for you. You still have to do it. It's absolutely crucial. a QMS is one of those areas of the business that if you're growing to exit, it is one of those aspects that will definitely bring the value of your company down if you don't have an appropriate QMS, because strategics have been burned on that in the past, right? They acquire a company, they're going to integrate it, and their QMS is a mess, right? And so it is a really important conversation, and it's one of those things where it's not like the pre-submission process. Like, oh, you prep for the pre-sub, you do the pre-sub, you're done with the pre-sub. The QMS is something that will go on through the duration of your company. And you always have to go back. It's like annual goals, monthly goals, quarterly goals. I mean, you just have to go back every so often, take a look. Is it still right sized for us? Is there something else we should be doing? Are we on to the next phase? Where are we with that? And so, just it's implementing a QMS is not a one and done thing. It's constant maintenance. Just get used to it. You're going to have to do it, and it's really important, right? Like Green Lake Gurus, a eQMS software platform. We had their old CEO on the podcast. He was maybe episode 136 or somewhere in there, and he said, when was the last time you went out to dinner and you said, wow, this food is compliant? Like, you never say that. You go out and you say, this is good quality food. Like, you should want a good quality product. If you have a good quality product, it's going to help. And so it's a weird thing. I don't know why there's such like a reservation, or there's like heartburn anytime someone mentions regulatory or quality. Like, it's there to make sure you're putting a good quality product on the market. So it's going to be around the rest of the life of your startup company. So you might as well get used to it.
No, agreed. Agree 100%. And I've seen the same, right? There's the folks that maybe came from a large company like a Pfizer or a Takeda. They bring a quality system with them in some way, shape, or form, and it's way too much. And it actually hinders their progress because they now must conform to these structured rules that probably had a reason once upon a time, but they really don't have any place in the startup that they're trying to form. So, I've seen that. And then I've seen what you said too, those have nothing. Oh, what's a quality management system? Well, here's a book I'd like you to read. Right. It's called the CFR. So speaking of kind of talent and getting a startup off the ground, I think we can agree that, your first round of funding, you don't need to go out and hire 30 people, right? There's firms like yours and Kymanox as well that will kind of supplement your staffing and give you the right people at the right phases of the project. But when you get to that point where you're starting to build out your internal team, I guess what recommendations do you have for attracting this talent to a small kind of fledgling company so that you can actually get those kind of startup minded folks that know a lot about a lot of things, or I would say a little about a lot of things, so that they can pivot and be agile and make sure the company is growing in the right direction?
Yeah. So, and I would, what I'm about to say now, I would also apply to the earlier phase where you have your team of consultants as well, because that is your team. At that point in time, they are your team. And so this is another area. I'll talk about that really quick first is treat your consultants like you would treat your team members, because they're part of your team, and your success is they're playing a big role in that. There's so many times where I remember, especially when I was at NAMSA, where it was like, wow, is this how you treat your internal team as well? Like, this is wild. You would never talk to an employee like that, right? And a lot of times, I'll hear startups say, well, but I'm paying you as a consultant. Do you pay your employees? I don't understand. There's no difference, right?
Right.
It's just you could literally tell me tomorrow that you don't want me to work on the project anymore because budget's tight. So actually, I should probably fit kind of nicely into your system, right? And so, anyway, that's my quick rant. Is
sure,
if you're building a good culture, it should be the other team members too. But in
Duane,
terms of talent,
I agree with you. I would say on a weekly basis, I have an employee cry, or that their customer made them cry. And like, why are they treating you like this?
Yeah, right.
This is collaboration, not a,
right.
Anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. So in terms of building out talent and attracting talent, including your consultants and your early members, your culture is going to be everything, but also what metrics you're looking for in your talent is really important. Um, it's on you as the entrepreneur or the CEO or the management team or the whoever's reporting into them to build a culture that is worth coming to. Because at the end of the day, you're probably not going to compete. You can't go in there and take a Medtronic engineer and pay them more than Medtronic can. That's probably just not going to happen very frequently. What you can offer them is upside. So equity in the company. I think that's when you're building culture. Giving people skin in the game for them committing to you as an early stage company is wise. We do it here at Project MedTech. We have a lot of clients who do that. I think that's a really, really important piece of the puzzle. Also, building a strong, comfortable culture that everyone buys into and can feel is really important. And that's like I don't have really great advice on how to do that. But anytime you walk into a place, they always have the culture and the principles and the values and everything on the wall. But when you walk into a place and people are like, "Oh, I can feel it on day one," you've built something special. And I don't know how to. There's no measuring that. It's literally just how people are feeling. When you're talking about what you're looking for, we saw a video that I'm sure went viral on TikTok or Instagram. I believe Simon Selleck was talking about it, who is the author of Start With Why. It's a great book if you haven't read it. But he was talking about when you look for talent, the you measure it on trust and performance, right? And so he shows this chart, and you could YouTube this and it would come up. But the Navy SEALs say that if they have a high performer, low trust, they don't want that person on the team. So one of the highest levels of the Navy, the team that has to operate at the highest efficiency at all times will say no to potentially the highest performer if they can't trust them. And so they actually said that high trust, low performance was more desirable than high performance, low trust. And we've actually kind of taken that approach here too. And we're only 4 years old. We've probably missed on a few, and we've also taken the method of fire fast, right? If they're not a good fit culturally, then they can't be on the team, right? But I think looking at things like that, there's always this like, oh, I want the best person. I want the best person. That doesn't even work in sports. I mean, it's all about your company culture, and so if you have a team of medium performers, but they're all high trust, gosh, I'll take that every day of the week. It just creates a much better environment. So I think maybe reevaluating some of that sometimes is we always hear that. I guess it's interesting, and there's all these ways to measure performance. There's not a lot of ways to measure trust, and so it is difficult. Like it's a tough thing to bring on talent. But every time I talk to an entrepreneur, oh, we just hired, he's the best or she's the best biomedical engineer and neuro in some neuro field, right? Like it's never yeah, they're good. They also have a degree from MIT, but boy, they're a good person that we really connected with. I can really trust them. I know them. It's a network connection. That's how we got to them. So
Sure.
I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah. But I always go back to that video anytime we're personally hiring people for sure. This is a good reminder.
Makes complete sense. I mean, if you have 10 employees, but one of them is super smart, but super toxic, I mean, no one wants to be around that. They're going to go find somewhere. Your good people will leave, right?
They'll destroy it. Like one bad egg in there will stunt company culture.
No, absolutely. So I guess let's say that we are kind of far along in our development pathway. And I actually experienced this with a startup recently as well. So we look like we are going to be approved or get our clearance, our 510K clearance or whatnot, but we don't know what to do next, right? So how do we sell this thing? Where are the commercial avenues? And I feel like, yes, obviously a lot of the entrepreneurs that start these companies have some business sense and some perspective of, oh, we can just go to a distributor, this and that. But there's a lot more to it than that. So I guess my question for you, what would be some recommendations of resources that medtech companies in this later phase of development can start leaning into so that when they actually get their approval or their clearance, they are ready to go to market and they don't have this lag time of trying to figure out the commercialization aspects of the supply chain and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, this is another reason why Project MedTech was founded, which is when you are talking about regulatory strategy and you're talking about the early business strategy, commercialization strategy should be being talked about right then and there. And I'll circle back to the level of detail in which I think you should have that. But in terms of later stage companies that just get clearance and they're actually going to start selling, right? We could probably do a whole episode on the importance of that and the different tips there. But if you are not if you think you're just going to put this to a distributor and they're going to sell your product, you're crazy. Like when you think about sales, I want a sales force that is waking up and thinking about my product every day and how they're going to get it into the hospital or into the customer's hands and close the sale. And so that's just personally for me. I mean, there are definitely ways to use distributors. There are definitely ways to use 1099s, but I want some people that are thinking and only carrying my product, into the hospital and only representing my company, because then I know that they're always putting their best foot forward there. So that's probably my little piece of advice there. But where this really all starts, though, is that really, really early phase. There's a guy named Nick Anderson. He's in Utah. He does some reimbursement consulting. He's not part of Project MedTech, but he was at one of our events a couple years ago, and he said, one thing you need to understand about healthcare is this. And so he goes through this spiel where he talks about, we all pay money into a big, as American citizens, all pay money into a big pile of cash over here, and that's insurance companies. We consume our healthcare in the U.S. healthcare system, hospitals, surgery centers, dentist's office, wherever, eye doctors, and that sits over here. At a core level, the main mission of the healthcare system is to extract as much money from that pile that sits over here as they can and retain as much money within that four walls as they can. It's a business. And so the way which they do that is clinicians, physicians, PAs, NPs, nurses, techs, doctors, whatever it is, right? And so when you are talking about your business, you have to understand the flow of cash and who are you creating value for. Every product I've ever seen creates value for patients. Most products are also creating value for physicians, clinicians, or making things easier, stuff like that. You have to do the uncomfortable piece of this. Everyone loves healthcare because you're changing lives, right? There's nothing more gratifying than seeing a heart valve you worked on and all of a sudden it saves your uncle's life, 5 years later. That's amazing. That's a feel good story. Unfortunately, there's a business aspect of all this. And if you're not sitting down at the very beginning when you're developing regulatory strategies and your business strategy, and you're talking about who is going to pay for this, why are they going to pay for this, and who am I creating value for, and how do I show them that, then it's too late when you get to your FDA clearance to go, okay, great. So who am I creating value for? or who's paying for this? If you're thinking about it, then boy, it's way too late. Like, you should be spending an exhaustive amount of time figuring out the economics behind why your product's a good fit at the beginning. Because if you can't figure it out, don't even worry about the regulatory, and don't even worry about building the product, right? Because it's not going to make a lot of sense. So you got to think about that. It's an uncomfortable conversation because everyone who's in this industry is in it for a good reason, and it's to change lives and make a positive impact. But it's still a business, and you got to figure out where you fit in it.
Sure. And this goes back to what you mentioned earlier about the first iteration of a product going to market doesn't need all those bells and whistles. It's distracting. It really is going to delay things. And if it triples the price of the product, who's going to buy it? Who's going to reimburse it? The answer may be no one.
Yep. And this is the book I mentioned, Start With Why, talks about this. It talks about innovation versus features. It talks about customers, repeat customers, and loyal customers. And so, to your point, like, innovation versus features, focus on the innovation. Define what the innovation is and define what the features are. Worry about the innovation first. When it comes to customers, repeat customers, and loyal customers, getting, initial customers and repeat customers versus loyal customers are two different things. Repeat customers, you still have to manipulate in order to get them to purchase again, right? Oh, hey, well, we'll give you a discount if you continue with us, or we'll do this if you continue with us. Loyal customers are customers that are like, wow, I can't live without this product. The iPhone, those are loyal customers. There are, I can't tell you how many people, I don't care if the Android is that much better of a phone or not. There are people who will only buy Apple products, no matter what. Doesn't matter what the cost is. That's a loyal customer. How do you get those, right? So you should be thinking about that too at that early phase.
That's funny. I just had that argument with a colleague yesterday when I bandied about my new Android phone. It's divisive as politics.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
All right. Well, Duane, I really appreciate you joining us on The Factor today. It was great speaking with you, talking about how Project MedTech can work with startups, kind of giving them advice, in a lot of these different areas. We could probably talk about this topic for another 3 or 4 hours, but, I think we're out of time for today. So again, thank you very much. And it was great speaking with you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That was Duane Mancini from Project MedTech. For more information on their events, consulting services, or to listen to their 3 types of podcast series, head on over to projectmedtech.com. Thank you so much for listening to or watching this episode. Please subscribe or follow this podcast in whatever app you're using right now, or follow Kymanox on LinkedIn for all updates. This episode was edited and produced by Earfluence. We'll see you again soon on The Factor.